The scandal erupting from newly released Epstein files has sent shockwaves through British politics, threatening to topple careers at the highest levels of government. What began as historical revelations about connections to a convicted sex offender has morphed into a full-blown political crisis that now endangers Prime Minister Keir Starmer's leadership. The story centers on Peter Mandelson, a Labour grandee whose proximity to Jeffrey Epstein has become impossible to ignore, and whose appointment as ambassador to Washington has become a lightning rod for controversy. Mandelson, once dubbed the Prince of Darkness for his ruthless political maneuvering, has been a fixture in British politics for decades. He served as a minister under Tony Blair, helped architect New Labour's rise to power, and remained influential even after leaving frontline politics. His reputation as a skilled operator and international networker made him seem like an obvious choice when Starmer needed someone to manage the crucial relationship with the United States. But that same networking prowess has now become his Achilles heel. The Epstein files paint a disturbing picture of just how close Mandelson was to the disgraced financier. Documents show he met with Epstein multiple times, including after the American's first conviction for soliciting prostitution from a minor. These weren't casual encounters at public events. These were private meetings, visits to Epstein's properties, interactions that suggested a genuine friendship rather than mere acquaintance. The optics are catastrophic for any public figure, but especially for someone about to represent Britain on the world stage. What makes this particularly damaging is the timeline. Epstein's 2008 conviction was public knowledge. Anyone conducting even basic due diligence would have known about his criminal history. Yet Mandelson continued the relationship. This wasn't a case of being fooled by a con artist who hid his crimes well. This was a conscious decision to maintain ties with a registered sex offender. That judgment call now haunts not just Mandelson, but everyone who defended his appointment. Starmer initially stood by his man. The Prime Minister praised Mandelson's experience and dismissed concerns about the Epstein connection as historical noise that shouldn't derail an important appointment. This was a calculated political bet. Starmer wagered that the public would separate past associations from present qualifications, that voters would focus on Mandelson's diplomatic skills rather than his questionable friendships. That bet is now looking catastrophically wrong. The pressure has been relentless and bipartisan. Conservative MPs have hammered Starmer daily in Parliament, demanding explanations for why someone with such compromising connections was chosen for such a sensitive role. But the criticism hasn't been limited to political opponents. Members of Starmer's own party have expressed discomfort, with backbenchers quietly telling journalists they're appalled by the decision. Victims' advocacy groups have organized protests. Newspaper editorials across the political spectrum have condemned the appointment. The consensus is remarkable in its breadth. What's particularly striking is how this scandal has exposed Starmer's political vulnerabilities. He campaigned as Mr. Clean, the former prosecutor who would restore integrity to government after years of conservative chaos. His entire brand was built on being different, on having higher standards, on putting ethics first. The Mandelson appointment has shattered that carefully constructed image. How can you claim to represent a new era of accountability while appointing someone who socialized with a pedophile? The contradiction is too glaring to spin away. The drip-drip of new revelations has made the situation progressively worse. First came confirmation that Mandelson had met Epstein. Then came details about multiple meetings. Then photographs emerged. Then witness statements describing their interactions. Each new piece of information has made the previous defense obsolete. Starmer's team has been forced into a constant retreat, always one step behind the story, always scrambling to explain away the latest damaging detail. It's a classic political death spiral. Behind the scenes, Labour strategists are reportedly in panic mode. Internal polling shows the scandal is cutting through with voters in ways that typical Westminster controversies don't. People understand the Epstein story. They know who he was and what he did. They don't need political sophistication to grasp why associating with him is wrong. This isn't about arcane parliamentary procedures or technical policy disputes. It's about basic moral judgment, and voters are rendering their verdict. The ambassador role makes everything worse. If Mandelson were being appointed to some domestic advisory position, the outcry might be containable. but representing Britain in America, where Epstein's crimes occurred and where his victims still seek justice, seems almost deliberately provocative. American politicians have already signaled their discomfort. Victims groups in the United States have announced they'll protest any official events Mandelson attends. The diplomatic mission is poisoned before it even begins. Some defenders argue that Mandelson himself wasn't accused of any crimes, that knowing someone who turned out to be a monster doesn't make you complicit in their crimes. This legalistic defense misses the point entirely. Politics isn't court. The standard isn't reasonable doubt. It's public confidence. And the public has no confidence in someone who chose to remain friends with a convicted sex offender. The judgment required to make that choice is fundamentally incompatible with representing the nation. The comparison to Prince Andrew has been inevitable and devastating. The Queen's son was effectively exiled from public life because of his Epstein connections, despite also never being charged with crimes. If a royal prince couldn't survive the association, how can a political appointee? The double standard is impossible to justify. Either proximity to Epstein is disqualifying or it isn't. Starmer is trying to have it both ways, and the contradiction is destroying his credibility. What happens next depends largely on Starmer's willingness to cut his losses. He could withdraw Mandelson's appointment, admit the decision was wrong, and take the short-term hit to his authority. The alternative is to dig in, defend the choice, and hope the story eventually fades. But the latter strategy looks increasingly untenable. The scandal isn't fading. It's intensifying. More files may yet be released. More details may yet emerge. Every day Mandelson remains the ambassador-designate is another day of damaging headlines. The political calculation is brutal. Backing down makes Starmer look weak and indecisive. But stubbornly defending the indefensible makes him look morally compromised. There's no good option, only less bad ones. This is what happens when politicians prioritize loyalty and insider connections over basic ethical standards. They end up trapped between their principles and their personnel choices, unable to escape without damage. For Mandelson, the career implications are severe. Even if he somehow survives this scandal and takes up the ambassadorship, his effectiveness will be permanently compromised. Diplomacy requires moral authority. It requires the ability to represent your nation's values credibly. How can someone tainted by Epstein connections lecture other countries about human rights or rule of law? The hypocrisy would be too obvious. His diplomatic career is over before it started, regardless of whether the appointment technically proceeds. The broader lesson is about the enduring consequences of association. Epstein's crimes were so heinous, his exploitation so systematic, that anyone connected to him remains permanently tainted. There's no statute of limitations on this kind of reputational damage. Time doesn't heal these wounds. Distance doesn't create separation. The stain is permanent. Every politician who socialized with Epstein, who took his money, who enjoyed his hospitality, will eventually face a reckoning. Starmer's government is now facing its first genuine crisis. Not a policy disagreement or political setback, but a fundamental test of integrity. The Prime Minister must decide what matters more: defending a controversial appointment or maintaining his credibility as an ethical leader. He cannot do both. The Epstein files have forced a choice that will define his premiership. Whatever he decides, the damage is already done. The question is only how much worse it gets.